Um, do Missouri voters see those as actually like concrete solutions that are separate and apart from politics, and so therefore it gives them an opportunity to vote one way, which might be um, a little bit diametrically or opposed to the very policies that their candidates that they're voting for believe in?
I would agree and disagree with you at the same time. I agree with you that there was no political cost to Republicans banning most abortions in 2022, but there was a policy cost. I think that one of the noticeable things that I have seen since Amendment 3 passed is the anti-abortion folks are making all sorts of excuses why they lost. The pro side was better organized, the pro side had more money, it only requires 50% plus one instead of 60% like in Florida. Not once have I heard anybody on the anti-abortion right side say, maybe we lost because we instituted one of the strictest abortion bans in the country that even Republicans thought went too far. Like, you heard that clip earlier from Josh Hawley. Even he doesn't support an abortion ban that doesn't have rape or incest exceptions. Donald Trump doesn't support that. Donald Trump was quoted as saying that 6 weeks in Florida was too short. So by extension, you would say that 0 weeks in Missouri is probably not even something that Donald Trump would agree with. So I would actually say that the reason this passed is a direct consequence of legislative action. And the ballot initiative process, while it may not be a coattails benefit to Democrats, it can be a check on some of the excesses of the Republican-dominated legislature. And I think that because this is a constitutional amendment, and because of the political dynamics I talked about earlier, getting rid of this is going to be very difficult, and there really is going to be an expansion of abortion access that is going to be significant and tangible and real for a number of years here.
Okay, that is very, very interesting.
I wonder what's
this good bank's going to think you said about the excesses of a single-party dominated legislature.
Well, let's see.
But before we do that, we spent a lot of time on Amendment 3, but there were several other really interesting ballot measures that Missouri voters had their say on. Let's go through some of them actually quickly. First of all, there was Amendment 6, which would have allowed court fees to be used to pay police salaries and retirement benefits, and voters rejected that one. Tell me about that.
I think they rejected that one because that was something that was put on the ballot by the legislature, and unlike Amendment 3, there wasn't a robust proponency campaign, and I think that pretty much every editorial page in the state said to vote against that. What I have noticed is that when there is a lower profile ballot initiative up for grabs, and people don't really know about it, they typically either look at their local newspaper or maybe look to see what their legislators say. And I just don't think that there was really strong support either from the editorial page side or even from the Republican side. This was kind of a niche issue. And because there wasn't a really strong pro campaign, and because, as you kind of seen, there is a tendency for even Republican voters to be skeptical of things that seem to be Republican leaning on a statewide ballot, I think that is the reason why this did not even come close to passing.
Okay. And then there was also Proposition A, which was a ballot measure to increase the Missouri state minimum wage to $15 an hour and to ensure that workers are eligible for paid sick leave. That one passed. Tell me about that.
I think it's actually the opposite reasoning that I mentioned before. There was a very well-funded and well-organized pro-campaign for this, and while there were business groups that opposed it, they didn't spend a lot of money to try and defeat it. This is a pattern that we've seen with minimum wage increases in Missouri since I started covering Missouri politics. There are people that there are groups that complain about minimum wage increase ballot initiatives, but they never actually do much of anything to try and defeat them. I think the other thing too is in this world of inflation, $15 an hour, while it may have seemed high 10, 15 years ago, I think it actually seems pretty reasonable to people. So that is probably the reason that passed. But I do know that business groups are not happy with the sick time requirement part of this. And They may try and sue over it, or because this is a statutory change, they may actually try to get the legislature to make some changes to that. But there will be a lot of opposition to that because this wasn't even close. I think it passed 58 to 42.
Yeah.
So there'll be a little bit more resistance to try and do anything legislatively with this.
Okay, well, so let's listen to what Governor-elect Mike Kehoe had to say about Proposition A. This is again from a September debate where he said he wouldn't support raising the minimum wage or wouldn't support paid sick leave. And in the debate, he said that stance of his is based on his 35 years as a businessman who he says he's helped create hundreds of jobs, and therefore he does not think that higher minimum wage or paid sick leave is the right choice for workers.
I believe that government should not be setting wages for people. I think the economy and business should. And when we change minimum wage standards, we actually affect those that we're trying to help the most. Minimum wages will cause prices to rise on the most basic of products. It also leaves a void for the youngest of people who want to start at an entry-level job. You take those jobs away from them, so you kind of create this false economy where kids don't have a job, and the products that the people who are buying, who can't afford it the most, the wages are going up on. We need to make sure that we let businesses set the wage. That's the appropriate place for that to happen, and that's what I think works best. Letting government involved in this does not work. The economy can set the prices.
So, Jason, what I'm wondering is that there's a worldview that Governor-elect Kehoe put forth in that statement there about government not having any role in setting wages, right? And that, you know, it sounds like the classic free market republicanism that we've known for 40 plus years now. But overwhelmingly, Missouri voters just are rejecting that worldview by saying, no, we should set a state minimum wage that's at $15 an hour, and they don't see an inflationary problem with it. They don't see it as denying teenagers summer jobs. They see it, I'm presuming, as a necessary aspect of, you know, a life at a living wage. So, I mean, what kind of republicanism or conservatism would you say, or how would you describe what conservatism is in Missouri right now?
I think it depends on whether you're talking about the politician class or the voter class. If you're talking about the political class, I would say the conservatism in Missouri is probably like way to the right of the national median. I think we saw that with our abortion ban, which was out of step again, even with other Republican states and with the future Republican president. And I think you also see this legislatively kind of on economic levels where you have a lot of Republicans who often talk about minimum wage increases disparagingly like this. I think for Missouri voters, I just think that it's not as ideologically homogenous as people assume. Yes, I think Missourians have conservative political views on things, especially when it comes to things like guns. I think there is a lot of real anti-abortion sentiment in Missouri among voters. And I think that there may even be some like low tax, low regulation type thing there going on as well. I just don't know if it goes to the most extreme or the most rightward measure. And we saw that with abortion. We saw that with minimum wage. We saw that with recreational marijuana 2 years ago. You can buy 3 ounces of marijuana in Missouri, show it to a police officer, and the police officer can do nothing because it's completely legal here. I just think that a lot of Missourians just don't have the down the line ideological views that a lot of political people have.
But they're putting those political people back in office, and repeatedly. So I want to get your analysis on that when we come back from the break. And then we're also going to take a look at, again, the story that Missouri is telling us, or the stories, and how that might reflect nationally. So lots of work to do when we get back. This is On Point.
Support comes from The Natural Way. Since 1995, committed to environmentally conscious tree and lawn care in Denver and southern suburbs, offering winter pruning plus 2024 lawn and plant health programs. TNWtrees.com. Support comes from Firefly Handmade Holiday Markets, November 16th and 17th in Denver on Old South Gaylord Street, and November 23rd on Boulder Street Mall, with 80 curated artisans, open to all. Firefly
And then when I go back in the house.
More Americans are going it alone and living single.
Maybe it's
But
too nice
the
out here.
economics of it are
Maybe
challenging.
it's too nice out
A
here.
couple pays the same amount for a hotel room, even though the value is twice as much for them.
This week on Real Talk with Denver 7 and CPR News, a special discussion recorded with our partners at Marketplace about navigating a world built for two, including into
know
your
if we're gonna get
golden
mail
years.
today or not.
This evening
Oh.
at 6:30 on CPR News and KRCC.
I'm Deborah Becker. When her little sister shipped off to the U.S. Army,
bond
Trinity
market's closed,
Chase
but it sounds
Hunt
like the
tried
stock
to keep in
market's open,
touch.
so we might.
It is no small feat to watch from afar as your 18-year-old sister
I don't think you'll get mail
goes
because
through
it's
one of the
Veterans
most
Day,
difficult
but
challenges
maybe
that
'cause
anyone could
it
ever
is-
experience.
We sound like
Her
the stock
podcast
market's
about
still
this
open,
is
but
on
the bond
NPR's
market's not.
College
So,
Podcast Challenge. Next time, I'm
maybe
hearing
just government agencies are closed.
Next hour on
And banks and
CPR
all that are
News
still
and
open.
KRCC.
Support for On Point comes from Olin College of Engineering, a hands-on, human-centered engineering education where the world is their workshop.
How is it the
Olin
banks are
students
open, though, because
experiment,
the stock
take
market's
risks,
open?
and collaborate to design, build, and help transform the way people live. Olin.edu. And Road Scholar, a not-for-profit educational travel organization offering adventures for adults in more than 100 countries. Learn more at roadscholar.org/explore.
Do you think I could eat these before July 25th?
I would hope so.
You're back with On Point. I'm Megan Chakrabarty, and today we are taking a look at the story that the state of Missouri has to tell. Voters there last week did what they've done in the past many election cycles. They basically voted for Republican office holders almost entirely across the board, and in some cases very conservative ones. But then they also had a slate of very interesting ballot measures in front of them. And they passed some, which includes a protection for abortion access, which will now be enshrined in the Missouri state constitution. They increased their state's minimum wage to $15 an hour and added some paid sick leave measures to that as well. They voted against a new source of funding for law enforcement. So is this a split between desired solutions versus the politicians that people are putting into office, or is there something deeper here that's ripe for understanding? I'm joined today by Jason Rosenbaum. He's in St. Louis, and he's the politics correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio. And Jason, hang on here for a second, because we want to hear also from, again, people on the ground who were supporting some of these successful ballot measures in Missouri. And Richard Von Glahn is one of them. He was the campaign manager for Missourians for Healthy Families and Fair
Richard Von
Wages.
Glahn.
That's the coalition behind that $15 minimum wage and paid sick leave measure, which passed. And Von Glahn told us that he recognized they had a winner pretty early in the process.
On that first
Von
day,
Glahn, are
we
you
gathered
gone?
over 10,000 signatures all across the state. It was actually the largest day of single signature collection pulled off by volunteers ever in the history of the state, and we've worked on ballot initiatives a number of times. And so that really told us at that point, you know, this is an issue that is resonating with people, and resonating strongly.
But of course, in politics, victory is never guaranteed. The initiative faced opposition primarily from larger business associations like the Missouri Restaurant Association and the State Chamber of Commerce. But Von Glahn thinks those organizations don't reflect individual business owners in Missouri who he felt were largely in support of the proposition's efforts. And also, the opposition didn't reflect what canvassers heard from voters directly, regardless of who they might vote for in the presidential or Senate races.
The interesting thing about ballot initiatives is they really get to be these sort of conversations between neighbors about our experience of our daily lives. I mean, I know myself, I gathered signatures from people in my community that I know voted for a conservative candidate. But when I asked them, hey, you know, do you think a parent should have to, you know, sort of be punished, not be paid, if they have to pick up a sick child from work? I can have that conversation with people that go to my children's elementary school, and the answer is universally, you know, no, that shouldn't happen.
By the way, Missouri was one of 3 states where paid leave was on the ballot in this election, and all 3 states voted overwhelmingly to support those measures. As you heard earlier, Missouri's initiative captured 58% of the vote. In Alaska, 57% of Alaskans voted for a similar measure. In Nebraska, they passed their ballot initiative overwhelmingly with 74% of voters in favor. With that level of support, it's hard to imagine the initiatives as a partisan measure. At least that's von Glon's take.
So much about candidates and partisan campaigns, you know, you're either a Coke or a Pepsi guy, and you don't delineate between Coke and Pepsi, and you don't even talk to people who drink the other drink. And ballot initiatives just aren't that way. It allows us to talk to people about the experiences that we're having and living and why those experiences matter.
I'd also add that ballot measures allow voters to decide on things that politicians are supposed to be doing, which is actual solutions. Now, von Glon says that ballot initiatives provide for a kind of education as well for voters that is not part of traditional partisan political campaigns.
I think a lot of people actually don't know what the minimum wage is. And so when I would ask people, even if I said the minimum wage is $12.30 an hour, I'd say, how much do you think that equates to over a week? You know, people would say, well, I assume $700-800, because they think a minimum wage should pay for not an extravagant, you know, but you should be able to afford an apartment and food and different things. And I'd say, actually, it's less than $500 a week. And then people would sort of connect that and say, oh, that's not right. And I'd say, correct.
That's Richard von Glon, campaign manager for Missourians for Healthy Families and Fair Wages. Jason, Rosenbaum, hang on here for a second, because now's the chance for us to bring in Michael Strawberry. He's assistant professor of political science at Washington University. His research focuses on American politics, quantitative methodology, and racial and ethnic politics. And he's also with us from St. Louis. Professor Strawberry, welcome to you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so first of all, I have to say Jason gave us some pretty interesting reasons to perhaps be skeptical that there's any kind of conflict here between who voters put into office versus the policies they actually want. Because, you know, as Jason said, in Missouri, that trigger law on abortion was extreme. Right, I mean, it was the most extreme one in the country, and perhaps there was voter reaction to the extremity of that rather than their view on whether or not there should be abortion access. And then Jason also said something interesting about inflation right now and how that is really hitting people hard. Perhaps that was a factor when we think about the passage of this new $15 minimum wage. So does that make this kind of an exceptional election cycle, or do you think that there's actually something more to be discussed regarding what we've been calling this tension, but that voters might have?
I think in many ways I probably agree with a lot of the descriptions given so far, because for me, it's mainly a story around the fact that voters aren't dumb. You know, I think we kind of assume that voters have this ability to sort of put aside their personal experiences and vote down ballot. But the split ticket voting between the candidates and the issues really speaks to the fact that for many of these individuals, they're thinking about what's going on in their everyday life there, regardless of their political affiliation and their loyalty there. So you mentioned inflation. You can also think about with Amendment 3, just the importance and the salience of reproductive rights for many women in this country. I also want to point out the fact that the reason why this tension really is an interesting story, but is not necessarily one of we see a world where Democrats can have overwhelming success in Missouri, is the simple fact that the margins weren't that large. You mentioned before, kind of like, you know, the fact that Republican candidates did a great job of winning by 10 double-digit points in several of their districts. When you look at some of the measures, if I remember correctly, I believe Amendment 3 passed with 3 points. So, you know, 51% really just suggests that it didn't take that many Republicans to come across the aisle and support Amendment 3 in the way we would think that we had this huge jump towards Amendment 3, you know, towards Democrats there. So if it's not taking many Republicans to switch their vote, that really suggests that the tension isn't there, but for some personal interests, really just overrided partisan affiliation.
Okay, that's a really good point. So let's zoom out for here for a second. We saw abortion rights questions pass in almost every state where it was on the ballot, with the exception of Florida, I believe. And as we mentioned earlier, we saw paid leave also pass overwhelmingly in all 3 states where it was on the ballot. I mean, do you see what's happening in Missouri as reflective of the voters aren't dumb assertion that you made nationally?
Yes, I do, because if we can go even broader than just the amendments, we can think around the tension between voters in many swing states. You know, we saw multiple statewide candidates, Wisconsin and Michigan, win the races where Kamala lost. So, you know, we think around just how voters are making interesting choices in the candidates and they should support there. Missouri in many ways is sort of a reflection of that, of many citizens, you know, seemingly supporting candidates, but issues, they still think about what's best for them there. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about voters. We sometimes, in general, not just Missouri, we try to characterize them as having no time or energy to think about these issues there. But it doesn't take time to think around the cost of groceries if you're buying groceries every day. It doesn't take time to think about the importance of reproductive care if it's something you're dealing with every day. So these issues that have tangible consequences for folks in their everyday lives, it allows them to process them in a different way than large-scale meta issues that maybe seem beyond the scope of their everyday considerations.
Okay, so Jason Rosenbaum, let me turn back to you here, because I'm hearing
Jason
what
Rosenbaum?
Professor Strawbridge is saying.
Rosenbaum.
And remembering that in our conversation, Jason used the word extreme several times in terms of like the Missouri state legislature and some of the policies they've advanced.
I wonder if he has a hard time getting
It seems to me that given these ballot measures,
probably gay.
There's a pretty strong constituency in Missouri for non-reactionary
Yeah, he changed his name to Rosie Bottom because he is
where's
gay.
the candidate who might stand up and say, I support some abortion restrictions, but definitely don't think that a 12-year-old who has been raped by a cousin should be forced to have a baby? I mean, do those candidates exist in Missouri?
Interestingly, like Mike Kehoe, he is one of those candidates. He said multiple times that he supports exceptions for rape and incest, and he actually was attacked by his Republican primary opponents for saying that. In fact, I'll put another example on. I asked now future Governor Kehoe last year about a possibility of enacting protections for LGBTQ people against discrimination, because he had voted for that when he was a state senator. And while he didn't give like his assurances that he would support that as governor, he did basically say that Republicans have to start reaching out to LGBTQ people more and have to like acknowledge that they exist. And he was attacked mercilessly.
Have you seen the little kitty, white kitty at the end of the street there? Since it snowed?
Little black kitty?
White. The one that's got the broken leg.
Oh, that one. No. I haven't been out much. You got it, stop.
Just parked there for a minute. He's looking at his next delivery.
Missouri Right to Life did not endorse Kehoe in the primary, and I don't think they did very much to support him in so he doesn't really have much incentive to do anything.
He's gonna get out and ask us, where's this place at?
He's following Google Maps and they switched to 5G, so his phone's bugging out. We're all getting radiated with 5G right now.
That's what that vibration is. Oh my god, my toes. I can feel my feet again. Becky.
Linda would probably flip out when she sees her phone switch to 5G. Oh my god, I'm being poisoned.
Fucking idiot.
Well, like the electric box and stuff like that, she wrapped it in that tin stuff, or that stuff that we use for the windows.
Or what?
She wrapped it with that silver stuff that we use on the windows.
What?
The electrical box outside.
Idiot.
Because she thought it was bringing waves to her or something.
Probably was.
And this gets a little inside baseball, so forgive me for a second, but it is important. The Speaker of the House has monumental power over moving legislation.
Can you wave?
Nope, he was looking the other way. He was concerned what I was doing.
Oh, I thought he had it right away. I was going to let him go. He sat there for a minute. I'm like, well, fuck it, I'll go. And I saw that guy coming. And I'm like, Alright, so
I'm gonna have to put that in my book. Anybody make sense of this?
Strawberry. Strawberry.
shifts in voter patterns and just proportions is going to really obscure the reality of who's showing up to the polls. It's the same people on one side and just less on the other, but then obviously that changes how the division works.
So ultimately, though, those folks, you're right. We're going to do a show that is just going to talk about people who stay home. Everybody who's on that top line of the ballot. But with that, unfortunately, because I've had such a fascinating time speaking with both of you, Michael Strawbridge, assistant professor of political science at Washington University, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Jason Rosenbaum, politics correspondent for St. Louis Public Media.
Strawberries and Rosenblickers.
To have you along with us. Thank you so much.
Do you remember Daryl Strawberry's baseball
and
pitcher?
Both of them joined us from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm Megan Chakrabarty. This is On Point.
I had a friend that was a real fan.
Huh?
I had a friend that was a real fan when we were young. He used to try to collect baseball cards with it.
I had a lot of baseball cards. I had a whole box of them that were stolen.
Yeah, he had a bunch of baseball cards too, but you know, back as kids, you don't think they're going to be worth anything 20 years, 30 years down the road.
Well, I sold a bunch of them, and I think my sister gave it to her friend.
WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM,
that's what I grew up with.
American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from Storyworth. Each week, Storyworth emails a loved one a question about their life. After a year, they'll publish family memories into a bound book to keep forever. Learn more at storyworth.com. And BetterHelp. Support for On Point comes from BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 35,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public.
This is CPR News, 89.5 FM KPRN Grand Junction, 88.3 FM KPRH Montrose, 88.3 FM KPYR Craig, and at CPR.org.
You turn to Colorado Public Radio for news and music. Here for you because of generous donors who invest in this community resource. Thank you, Nancy Gooding, for your philanthropy. Learn about giving at CPR.org.
Support comes from the Harris Law Firm, proud to support Horizons Colorado, an enrichment program that has provided programming for Denver youth with limited access to resources for 25 years. HorizonsColorado.org. Support comes from DCPA Broadway, presenting Funny Girl. Welcome to musical comedy heaven, featuring classic songs including I'm the Greatest Star and People. Plays the Buell Theater December 10th through the 22nd. Tickets at denvercenter.org.
Hi, my name is Matt Megacy. I'm part owner of Mutiny Information Cafe, a bookstore, coffee bar, record shop, and comic book shop on Broadway.
Sponsoring CPR is an effective way to make an impact and get the word out about your business or organization.
We want to be seen as supporters of the music and art culture of Denver, and we know that we're reaching a lot of the people in our target audience. Money well spent.
Information on sponsoring CPR can be found on the support page at cpr.org. Funding here and now comes from MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulant software, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. From NPR and WBUR Boston, I'm Lisa Mullins.
And I'm Scott Tong. This is Here and Now. Coming up, Donald Trump says he'll slap bigger tariffs on stuff from China when longtime China analyst thinks a trade and economic war with Beijing is being underestimated.
Also, the COP climate summit is underway, but there's little optimism that meaningful change will be made at this year's gathering.
Whatever's promised in Azerbaijan is almost certainly going to be a fraction of what's needed to deal with the problem.
And the war in Ukraine is taking a toll on the country's hospitals.
Nowadays, we don't have enough medical staff, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses.
One nonprofit is training Ukrainian healthcare workers on the latest trauma procedures and equipment. Coming up Here and Now.
The news is first.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President-elect Trump has selected Elise Stefanik as his UN ambassador. Stefanik, a New York Republican, is the chair of the House Republican Conference. In a statement, Trump called Stefanik, quote, an incredibly strong, tough, and smart America First fighter. NPR's Danielle Kirkley has more.
Stefanik has sharply criticized the United Nations and particularly the UN Relief and Works Agency, which provides aid to Palestinians. In a May speech in Israel, she said of that agency, quote, the enemy is inside the gates of the UN. UNRWA fired 9 workers this summer, determining that they may have been involved in Hamas's October 7th attacks on Israel. Stefanik was a vocal Trump critic during his first run for the presidency, but came to be one of his staunchest defenders. Trump said in a post on his Truth Social network over the weekend that his last UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, will not be in his next cabinet. Danielle Kurtzleben, NPR News.
The Kremlin's denying media reports that Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke by phone last week with President-elect Trump about the war in Ukraine. We have more on this from NPR's Charles Maines.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov flat out denied the Sunday Washington Post story that Trump had warned Putin against escalating the conflict in Ukraine, calling for follow-on negotiations to end the war. This does not correspond to reality. It's completely made up, said Peskov. There was no conversation. Citing sources close to Trump, the Post claimed a phone call had taken place with Putin on November 7th. That's the same day the Kremlin leader publicly congratulated Trump on his election victory. Trump's spokesman tells NPR they don't comment on private calls between Trump and world leaders. Trump has repeatedly threatened to end U.S. military support to Ukraine if elected. Putin fears in Kyiv and much of Europe he intends to impose a peace largely on Moscow's terms. Charles Maines, NPR News.
Thousands of people, including government and corporate delegates and climate scientists, are attending COP29. Azerbaijan is hosting the annual climate conference. President Biden's senior advisor on clean energy, John Podesta, addressed the gathering today.
Our global partners know that addressing the climate crisis also bolsters their own national security and global security while creating jobs, new industries, and new opportunities. The United States has been the world's partner in these efforts for 4 years. That remains our mission.
However, President-elect Trump's likely agenda looms over pollution-fighting negotiations of the global gathering. In 2017, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Accord, under which nearly 200